Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. Very excited to bring you part 2 of my 3-week series on the Five Doctors, the 20th anniversary special, and the Terrance Dicks novelization of his own TV scripts. If you've been listening to this show for the entire run, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you know that this is a Peter Davison house. Peter was my first Doctor. I became addicted to the show with Peter as the lead. I have come to love many of the other Doctors as well, but there's nothing quite like the adrenaline rush for me of watching one of those Peter Davison stories again. I am transported effortlessly back to where I was on that autumn night in 1984 when I discovered the show at age 11 at the insistence of school friends. The moment that I was irrevocably hooked was the moment that I saw the cliffhanger to Enlightenment Part 1, and I have not missed an episode of Doctor Who voluntarily in the over 39 years since that fateful night. So in an episode that celebrates the Five Doctors and Peter Davison's tenure as Doctor Who, I am very, very pleased to announce my first guest this week, Elizabeth Morton, actor, best-selling novelist, wife of Peter Davison and mother-in-law of David Tennant, a huge part of the Doctor Who family. My thanks to Chloe Davies from Pan Macmillan Books for providing me with a promotional copy of the book and arranging this interview. Talking to Elizabeth was a blast. We are going to feature about half the interview here. We'll talk a little bit about her latest novel, The Orphans from Liverpool Lane, which was just released. The rest of that will feature next week on a special episode of Trap 1, where I'll play the entire interview and I'll give my review of her novel. This week I'll include a taste of the conversation about the book, and then our full conversation about Doctor Who and the Doctor Who family. And who is Elizabeth Morton's favorite Doctor? The answer might surprise you. This is the part of the program where I often talk about news events in the Doctor Who world or other aspects of my life, or the last episode of Classic Who that I watch randomly on Pluto TV. We're not going to do that today because we have a packed episode. After Elizabeth, I am joined by a 3-person panel of Doctor Who fan luminaries talking about the Five Doctors. Is it the greatest Doctor Who episode of all time? Once again, the answer may surprise you. Followed by my final 5 chapters analysis of the Five Doctors novelization. The first 7 chapters I broke down last week in episode 81A, and I certainly refer you back to that if you haven't heard it yet. But for now, Elizabeth Morton, The Orphans from Liverpool Lane, the Doctor Who family. Let's get to it.
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space, in a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts,
Eric Gulbranson,
Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
Explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse on shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast.
My next guest, I am very pleased to announce, is an actor and a writer and a member of the Doctor Who family. When her press officer at Pan Macmillan sent me a family photo, every single person in the photo was either Doctor Who or the child of Doctor Who. And then my next guest, Elizabeth Morton. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
And the occasion for our conversation today is your newest novel, The Orphans from Liverpool Lane, put out by Pan Macmillan. This is, I believe, your 5th Liverpool novel?
Yeah. So I write sagas, and sagas is very much a genre where you build up a readership where the stories are interconnecting, often set in the same part of the world, very much a kind of they're not series, they're standalone books, but some of the best saga writers, me at book 5 is just absolute dipping my toe in the water. When I get to book 25, then maybe I'll have come to the end of the canon. But it is yes, it's the genre, all set in Liverpool, all set post-war, all set, young women facing societal challenges, and romantic with a big kind of romantic thread in them. And I love them. I'm from Liverpool. I've written many other, I've written for TV and theatre, but I found my home with sagas. Just beginning, book 5, and I'm just beginning. I'm a newbie.
Oh my goodness. And looking at orphans, there's a lot of very hard-hitting issues in the book. You have a family of 4, the Rogan family, and the father is off to fight World War II and comes back after many years in a prisoner of war camp with serious PTSD issues and addiction issues, which certainly was an epidemic among soldiers all across the war. And you have his wife who is trying to make a go of it as a single mother during the war, and you have the 2 children. What was your starting point for this story?
Okay, my starting point is, for any book, is often a very visual event that I've been told about or heard about. And my mother, who had always spoken to me about when her father was in the war, very similar to the father in my story, she came back home and he left when he was about 2, and he was away for 5-6 years.
And we will pick up the rest of that conversation next week over on Trap One. I will devote a full episode to my unedited interview with Elizabeth Morton. We'll talk about the rest of her book and where the inspirations came from. And I will include the rest of the conversation and my review of the novel, The Orphans from Liverpool Lane. Let's join the conversation already in progress as we turn to the subject of Doctor Who. In terms of your own family tree, this is almost a time travel story, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. Yes, it is. Where do I start?
I have to ask, first of all, given your husband, given your son-in-law, out of the 14 so far, who is your favorite Doctor?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, it has to be John Pertwee because because I just remember an episode with slugs and hiding behind the sofa when I was little, and green slugs. You will probably be able to tell me the name of it. So and I loved his shirts. So what can I say? When sadly, when my husband was doing his stuff, I think I was slightly distracted with drama school and other things in my life. I wasn't watching Doctors. Yeah, John Pertwee. Sorry, Peter. Sorry, David. Of course, they're all fantastic.
And you were in the Five-ish Doctors as well, I believe, which Peter, I think, wrote.
Yes. That was it. I didn't exactly have a starring role, but I was in it, and I remember I made lots of cups of tea for people because we filmed some of it at our house, and I feel I was very much on that journey with him. I remember when he was beginning to do it. We were at a convention in Australia, and it was all starting to happen. It was great fun. Yeah. It just kind of grew and grew in terms of, well, that's like writing a book as well. You write a few chapters and it just becomes this thing.
How did you and Peter meet, I should say?
How did we meet? Well, again, is that, I often think, is that all to do with, time, sort of, because I was offered 2 jobs with Peter, acting jobs, both of which I turned down because I couldn't do them. I was busy doing something else. One was an episode of campy, and one was an episode of Peculiar Practice. So when I finally did meet Peter, it was through a mutual friend called Tyler Butterworth, who's a lovely actor, who's a trivia note here. His dad played the meddling monk in one of the Peter Butterworth is his name, in one of the earlier Doctor Who's. So I met him through Tyler, and we met kind of, on a sort of set up date by Tyler, which was much better than meeting at work, I guess. So that's how we met. Yeah, nice.
The irony of being introduced to Doctor Who by the son of one of Doctor Who's greatest 1960s villains, the meddling monk, is just hilarious to me.
It is probably. I've never really thought about that before, but it's only when you talk to people who recognize these characters that I have had that pointed out to me. I think it's rather nice, really.
And speaking of Doctor Who connections, you were telling me earlier you have a set of Doctor Who novelizations in your home.
Yeah. So they were given. So at one point, Mark Gatiss, I think he was having work on his house, and he didn't have anywhere to go, and he had a dog, and so for a brief time, he stayed at our house. We weren't there at the time, but he very kindly brought us a whole set of Doctor Who novelizations, like 1960s, I think, and the little Target books. Anyway, I must go and properly look at that. As I say, my sons are massive Doctor Who fans. No surprise there, really, but they are kind of like those, they are real, like, super fans, and so of course they know that they're much more into that. I must say, I'm not scrabbling around in the bottom of the cupboard for them, but I think my boys will have read them. Yeah, they are lovely things to have.
I became a Doctor Who fan 39 years ago, and the novelizations have been a large part of my life ever since, and of course,
really?
The inspiration for my podcast.
Amazing. Yeah, there's nothing like reading a book, is there, that you can just lose yourself in that's fantastic. Yeah.
And the Target books are very small size. I was able to bring them along. They're very portable to come on family vacations.
You can slip them in your pocket, can't you? Yeah. They don't take up too much space.
So between Peter and David and Georgia Tennant, I imagine you have a lot of stories you could tell from the Doctor Who production set, some of which I'm sure, because David is now Doctor number 14, some of which I am sure you cannot share with us.
Well, is this surprising? I've noticed it. I've noticed over time, actually, with Doctor Who, since being with Peter 25 years, 26 years, blimey. I've noticed over time that it's got much more high stakes in terms of sharing information. So it never was really like that. Well, then I suppose Peter wasn't doing Doctor Who, but I've seen over time. So there's not much chat, I have to say, about, the other day this happened. So probably because you probably get sued or something. So in the old days, there was you could probably be a bit more like gossipy about it. And the other thing is, Jason, it's like we probably would talk more about personal dramas, and I don't know what would we be talking about, Trump, for example, then we would be talking about what happened on the production set of Doctor Who. Whether that's because, as I said, just putting it into words now. Is it because actually it's become a little bit more sensitive, So you wouldn't kind of say, "Oh, this happened," or you'd be a bit more. You'd be a bit more kind of careful, I would expect, in a positive way. So production set, I know that it's quite grueling. I do know that in terms of the schedule, and that's but then I think it always was with Peter as well. A lot to get through and long hours, and but yeah, I'm trying to think of anything that I can add to the conversation on this, and I'd say it is. Yeah, I mean when you've got busy lives and everyone, you tend to sort of prioritize your conversation about, but your mother-in-law, or your, or your kind of, or what latest kind of stuff the kids are into, or work is we don't really talk. I mean, it's a very supportive family on all sides. So very supportive of my books and supportive of other, projects that people are involved in, that, and not necessarily Doctor Who. And that's really nice. But I expect if you're a family of doctors, medical doctors, you all sit around and talk about, the latest, this, that, the other, but it doesn't, occupy all of the talk.
Personally, I would love to not talk Donald Trump anymore, but that doesn't seem to be an option.
So would I. But there you go.
So when the most recent episode, Power of the Doctor, actually stars Peter and David in the same episode, although not on camera at the same time.
Yes, that's right. I'd forgotten about that. And that was a secret, wasn't it, until the night that it went out, that Peter was in it. I seem to remember he was also on a series called The Larkins on the same night. And it was like, he was saying, "Oh, what should have watched Doctor Who or The Larkins?" But he enjoyed, he loves Janet, and he loved that. That was very nice to go back and to be with, Janet again, and on the set of Doctor Who. That was fantastic. Yeah, it was. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
I had watched that episode with no spoilers going in. So David,
so were you surprised then?
Absolutely shocked that you had all the surviving doctors in it. So I was not expecting Peter showing up in costume, and then everyone thought that Ncuti Gatwa was going to be the doctor that Jodie Whittaker regenerates into, but instead, surprise, it's David Tennant again.
Yeah, no, it was, and that does just show you how, how they managed to keep that secret. Surprising, really, isn't it? That there were people out there so that, I suppose, that is another reason why there isn't so much. People are a bit more protective and careful, over keeping those secrets. I mean, amazing secret to be able to keep, really, when you think in the world we live in today. That was great that you had no idea, because I think that brought a lot of joy to people. Of course, we see the doctors, I saw Sylvester and Colin only the other day, because we often see them at conventions, and so that's they're part of our lives, the older doctors, which is absolutely. And then you meet the newer actors who are involved in the show now at those conventions, so that's very nice as well. It is a community. I can't quite believe now that there's Peter is Doctor 5, so does that mean there's 10 more doctors after him? Blimey. Amazing.
The numbering count gets sort of convoluted, because John Hurt appeared as Doctor Who as an unnumbered doctor.
Yes.
And now David is both 10 and 14.
Yes. Oh, yes. So that brings it down one number, doesn't it? Yes. Do you know what? Sometimes I think I write my sagas because it's a way of going and kind of escaping all the sci-fi, which makes your head explode on occasions. I just escape to the past of my imagination.
It's always interesting for me when I watch Peter in a non-Doctor Who role. So, being a native New Yorker, Law and Order is a very big part of our lives.
Oh yeah, is it?
It's been in continuous production for over 30 years. When I was in law
wow.
school, Law and Order was used as a teaching tool.
Oh wow.
And then
I
Peter,
didn't
of
even
course,
know it was still going. I didn't know it was still going. But
the
that's
original
great.
series has come back, and then there are
Right.
multiple spin-offs, many of which are,
Right.
well, because of the strike, not right now, but they are in active production
Yeah.
for this TV season.
Amazing. That's great.
And
No, that was a great show. That was a great show. And Peter was in the theatre at the time. And how he managed to do it, because I think he was in Legally Blonde, which is a really, quite taxing physically. And he'd be filming in the day and then working in the evening. And he was filming in and around London, I seem to remember, a lot of stuff on location. And of course, Freema was in it, wasn't she?
yes, she was.
Yes, yeah.
No, I have often walked through Law and Order shoots on my way to work in Manhattan or in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
So.
well, that's what I remember Peter doing that. And he said, we're filming in Trafalgar Square. I was like, how are you going to stop the traffic? He said, no, they don't do it like that. You just put power on. You power on and you use all the background artists are just happen to be people going to work. It's fantastic. Yeah.
The episodes of Law and Order that Peter did were based on American Law and Order episodes where I already knew the ending going in, but I was watching for his performance, which was very, very different from his Doctor Who performance, obviously.
Yeah.
And
no,
he's
a good actor, Peter. So he can be very different in things,
In preparation for this interview, I watched your episode of Dear John last night, which there was also an American version of Dear John, your episode of which was remade and is available on YouTube.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I'm amazed that I have seen that episode recently, and I've been amazed on many on many levels. But what I'm sort of amazed is that these things that you think were, of their time, they've gone, you've done it, you had a great time, and then they're back. They're back on the television now because of technology, and people are enjoying them. The other series I was in was something called Tripods, and when I went to when I was at a convention with Peter recently, someone said, "Oh, we're thinking of doing a Tripods convention." I was like, "What?" but I think people they love it, and it's especially, I suppose, if it's something they grew up with and it stays with them. But yeah, the world has changed. Who would ever imagine? Can't believe you watched that episode of Dear John. That's very funny. He was a lovely actor, Ralph Bates.
He passed away very young, I believe.
Yes, too young. He was a lovely actor.
The star of the American Dear John, Judd Hirsch, his family was in the same building as my grandmother in Brooklyn in the late 80s. So my grandmother had to buy a VCR to tape those episodes to show to the family, and I was the one who had to program the VCR for her. So I had a very young exposure to Dear John in the late 80s. I'll tell you that.
So is there an American version of me?
Yes. An actress named Jennifer Runyon played you.
No. I love it. There you go. You'd only get that trivia from a Doctor Who fan. That's
we catalog these things. I promise you, Elizabeth. We catalog all the cast lists.
Wow.
So I guess the last question that I have time to ask you, and thank you so much for your time today. Do you and Peter and the children, do you sit around and watch Doctor Who for pleasure? And if so, what is your favorite episode? You mentioned the Green Death already, which of course is a classic one.
That's what it was called. Well, I have to say, my favorite episode would be, and you'll have to, I'll tell you why, and you'll have to tell me the name of it. As I say, because we meet people, fans all the time, and so we know firsthand how important Doctor Who is in their lives. The episode I remember was when Louis and Joel, my sons, who are big fans, were watching the episode where Billy Piper and David, there were two Davids in it. Two Davids, a baddie and a goodie. But Billy Piper was leaving. And both my sons, but particularly Louis, because he was a bit old, were just in floods and floods of tears. And that's when I was kind of struck by just how powerful and how important it is, because it moved them in a way that I had seen nothing else do, and I thought it's about finding those connections. It's enabled for young people to find a place in the world. And so I'd have to say that would have to be my favorite. I'm sorry it's not one of Peter's. One of the other thing about Peter, which is why it's probably worth mentioning, is when people weren't watching it so much because it was not on the TV, the boys used to watch it, and they used to call it Dr. Daddy. And so wow. I do remember watching some of Peter's episodes with the kids and thinking, this is again an important things in their lives and our lives, and it's remained with me. So you could choose any one of those episodes, Jason. And as I say, I can't remember the name of the one where David was on a beach. Was on a beach. There were two of them. There was Billy and there was Louis and Joel, absolutely distraught, but moved in a very touching way.
That episode, I believe, is called Journey's End, and I know exactly where I was when I was watching it. So I also have very strong memories. And I will tell you personally, Peter was my first Doctor in 1984, being aired in the States. So my very first full episode was Arc of Infinity, and my favorite episode was Enlightenment from the very first few days that I watched. So Peter is the reason that we are all here today.
Absolutely. So that's hats off to Peter. But he's I don't want to get too gushing and I don't want to get too insulting. So I'm trying to kind of tread a fine line. But he's lovely, Peter.
And Elizabeth, we're about to lose our recording time. Thank you so much for joining us
today.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it. I look forward eagerly to your next books.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
And that's Elizabeth Morton. I had so much fun talking with her. The novel was an absolute page-turner. Like she says, she's writing sagas. I will have my complete review again on Trap One next week, but that was a book that I had trouble putting down. And just a really, really amazing conversation. Thanks again so much to Elizabeth, and thanks to Chloe at Pan Macmillan for helping arrange that. Very, very excited to feature Elizabeth on the show. I'm also very excited now to welcome my panel of three hard-hitting Doctor Who luminaries. We have Graeme Burk and Stacey Smith. Between them, authors and editors of at least a dozen Doctor Who nonfiction titles, probably a lot more than that. Stacey and Graeme and I have all known each other since the Wild West internet fandom Rec Arts Doctor Who days in the early 90s. They are good friends in real life. They are good friends of the show. They've both been on several times. And speaking of good friends, David Barsky, the American television producer and also a producer on this podcast, is joining Graeme and Stacey and myself. The four of us are going to talk about the Five Doctors. Is it the greatest Doctor Who serial of all time? We are going to go deep, and we are going to discuss the Five Doctors in every dimension and every detail. And you've heard David, and you've heard Stacey, and you've heard Graeme on this show before. You know they bring tons of humor. They know they bring tons of insight. I just could not bring myself to edit any part of this conversation. So the episode is going to go on for another 70 minutes with the four of us just totally fanboying over the Five Doctors. Following that, my breakdown of the final 5 chapters of the 1983 Terrance Dicks Five Doctors novelization, the first 7 chapters of which we covered last week in episode 81A. Let's get back to it. The special occasion for this week is the 20th anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the 20th anniversary special.
Stop
This
doing
is
that.
the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who and the 40th anniversary of the Five Doctors. I want to start this off with a thought experiment. I want to go around the table. We'll start with Stacey, and then I'll go over to Dave, and then we'll finish up with Graeme. Stacey, just randomly, free association, what do you think are 5 of the greatest classic series Doctor Who episodes of all time?
Oh God! Remembrance of the Daleks. The Doctor Who and the Silurians. I'll throw out Case of Androzani, Periods of Mars. Let's go with the Romans.
That's a pretty prestigious list. I think the Romans might not fall on a lot of top 5s, but it's a fair point. Dave, I'm afraid to ask you the same question because I'm sure it's going to be 5 Colin Baker stories, but why don't you give it a try?
Oh, actually, no. There's I got the TV movie in there as well. So no, just kidding. No. Towns of Wang Chiang, Seeds of Doom, Inferno, Horror of Fang Rock, and oh boy, I got a weird soft spot for Terror of the Autons.
That's pretty solid. I have my copy of Terror of the Autons, the novelization, signed by Terrance Dicks, so that makes it one of my top 5 stories I get, or one of my top 5 books anyway.
I just think there's so many great murders in it. Deaths, it's so much fun.
Barsky really enjoys it when people die horribly on camera.
I certainly do.
Which I guess ties into your day job.
Well, it kind of does. I tortured a human for a living for 7 years, so it was fun. That's what I do.
Most people call that marriage.
No, that was my job. I don't consider marriage a job. That's a hobby.
Hopefully, Dave's wife is not in the room for that particular comment.
Nor will she hear this episode.
Oh gosh, Pyramids of Mars, The Curse of Fenric, Remembrance of the Daleks, Inferno, and the Five Doctors.
Ah, so you do have 5 Doctors on your list. Finally, one of our panelists has seen the light of day before I could even start the conversion process.
Oh yeah, absolutely. After I have seen the Five Doctors, probably, I think when I think about the Doctor Who story I have seen the most, it's probably a neck and neck race between Robot and the Five Doctors, and I think the Five Doctors has finally lapped Robot on this case. Yeah, I watch it all the time. It is like the Star Wars of Doctor Who stories for me. In that I've seen it so many times, I know the dialogue off by heart and the cadences of the dialogue. Looks rather splendid, doesn't it?
I don't agree with Graeme at all.
It's interesting that only one of the 3 of you has 5 Doctors on your list of greatest stories. I've been struggling with this. I think 5 Doctors may be the greatest classic series story of all time, only because I've seen it probably more than almost any other classic series, with the possible exception of City of Death. And I think it probably has one of the most perfect quotable scripts. I venture to say that if I were to give you a prompt, you guys could probably recite the next 20 lines of TV dialogue from any scene in any direction. But let's go around the table again. Stacey, when did you first get to see it?
Yeah, I was about 10 years old, and it was a ridiculous storm. It was like they warned us, and they said the storm is coming, and it's so bad you're not allowed to watch TV. like, do not go near your TV because you will die. And I was like, but it's the Five Doctors is happening today. And my parents were like, no, you can't watch. I'm like, no, I have to. Like, I'm prepared to die watching the Five Doctors. And I knew it was this big anniversary thing happening. And I'm 10 years old. And I'm like, no, I'm going to do it. And my family went and huddled like in the garage or something. And I sat there watching the entire 90 minutes while this storm raged around me. And I don't know how we didn't even lose power, but I watched the whole thing and it was amazing.
Graeme, I have to ask you now, when did you first see Five Doctors, and was there ever a time where you risked literal death to watch a Doctor Who episode?
I didn't risk death to watch it. I told the story on Reality Bomb, actually. We had an episode where we talked about what is Christmas Doctor Who for you, and everybody talked about their favorite Christmas specials. Fair enough. For me, though, Christmas Doctor Who was always the Five Doctors because my local PBS station had what they called a holiday festival, and said in that tone of voice. And you know, back in the days of PBS in the 80s, you know, it was basically an opportunity to see lots of holiday movies in a time before TCM existed. So, you know, you get to see It's a Wonderful Life or Miracle on 34th Street, or you'd see Pavarotti and the Three Tenors. You know, they show all kinds of special programming. So they that was kind of like when the mother load of Doctor Who new content kind of always came to the PBS station. So like in 86 was the year that they showed Revelation of the Daleks in the early afternoon, did a whole bunch of New Jersey television specials, and then had An Unearthly Child for the first time. That was an amazing year. I remember, and so yeah, the winter of 1985, they showed the Five Doctors, and it was amazing. And I was just so excited. Like, it was like that was the special, and they trailed it and they showed clips from it. And of course, I had already read the novelization quite thoroughly. And I was familiar with everything. I was familiar with everything right down to the continuity errors. And I was so excited. I was so excited about it. And so I did not have to risk death. I just merely my own anticipation, which could have created death because I was that excited about it.
Did you see originally the 90-minute movie version or the 4-part version that was shown in the UK and then America? Because I had seen the 4-part version first.
90-minute version. The 90-minute version. And, you know, I there are things in it that I was really completely surprised by. I didn't know there was a William Hartnell clip at the start. So I just went out of my mind when I saw Hartnell in the TARDIS at the start, and I was like, oh my god, so amazing! I can't believe I'm actually seeing William Hartnell for the first time. It was really delightful.
Well, see, Graeme didn't grow up in Australia, so he didn't have to risk death for every other Doctor Who thing that he experienced.
They got polar bears.
Dave, when did you first see Five Doctors? I assume it was when you were a strapping young lad in New England in between Red Sox games and Patriot Super Bowl losses.
Yeah, I may have said this on my first appearance on this podcast. I may have mentioned, what was it? Was it a Thanksgiving night it aired or something like that, or the weekend? But it was literally the very first thing I ever recorded on VHS tape in 1983 when it first aired.
You would have seen it at the literal premiere 2 days before anybody in England had gotten to see it.
That is correct. So, and as the first thing I ever taped on VHS, I watched the crap out of this. I mean, I wouldn't say, man, the first week I probably watched it 5 times at least, which would probably give it as much viewing time as I already had the first 3 Tom Baker seasons in rotation in PBS. So, I mean, I knew it inside and out within a month, and I enjoyed every single one of it. And I honestly, you know, it's funny when you asked what our favorite stories were, and I've actually thought about this. I look at the Five Doctors as something completely different. So it's hard for me to be critical of it because I know it's this celebratory event, and a lot of it's tongue in cheek and fun and really unusual. So I tend to forgive it, you know, with its inconsistencies and its goofiness, and it's just supposed to be fun, and that's all it is to me. And that's why I won't, you know, harp on certain things like I would say Genesis of the Daleks or something, even, you know, discontinuity, if you will.
So we'll start off with Graeme for the next question then. What is the most important factor in the greatness of a Doctor Who story?
Okay, so I am. There is a part of me that is really, smart, rigorous critic me that has written many guidebooks about Doctor Who, and you can read that part of me anytime you want. All the books are still available on Amazon. The thing is with the Five Doctors, though, you get the other part of me, which is Graeme wants to be entertained me. And really, if you've got a story that's just stupendously entertaining, that is my benchmark for good Doctor Who. That is also my benchmark for great Doctor Who. Like if a story isn't unable to entertain me on some level, then there's something just fundamentally wrong with it. There's only been a handful of Doctor Who stories that have fallen past that bar. Like I can think of a couple in the past couple of years, actually, but for the most part, there's just, there's not many that have fallen below that bar. Like, if a Doctor Who story isn't entertaining me, then there's something fundamentally wrong. If it's boring me, it's really disastrously off the rails. The Five Doctors is just not only entertaining, it's kind of like a new level of entertaining. It's like exceptionally entertaining or uber entertaining. It's like watching the best concert you've ever been to, and they're playing the hits phenomenally well. I think the closest thing I've come to it in pop culture was this latest season of Picard, which I know you hate because you hate everything I like, but nonetheless, it was that same kind of, let's just play the hits really well, and let's just bring all the elements together so that you can gape, and it's just, I just love it for that. It's just amazing, and it's amazing to me that with a story that has a brief of, bring all five Doctors, myriad of companions, every single possible monster, and throw in the Master, and can you really amp up the Cybermen because the script editor's got a massive fetish for them? He actually not only did it, he actually made a really entertaining story that made it all work, which is really incredible. Like it just structurally, I actually showed the Five Doctors to my wife Julie, who is not a gigantic Doctor Who fan, although she's increasingly more of the opinion she likes the classic series more. But she loved the Five Doctors for that reason. It was, and she knows nothing about Time Lord lore or anything like that, but she got the vibe of the story. So yeah, I think entertainment is a really underrated principle for Doctor Who. And I think, which is odd because that is what it was literally designed to do. Like the number of people who get very sniffy about like I always hated the kind of hot take culture that kind of formed in the late Moffat years and the Chibnall era, particularly because they got very like every single Doctor Who story had to be like Pyramids of Mars levels of amazingness. And I'm kind of like, no, like those stories are great, but they're thermodynamic miracles that they actually happened and pulled it off and did everything. Like most television that actually manages to pass the bar of being entertaining has done like multiple things right. We don't actually talk about how they've done all these things right. like we, so I kind of, I look at a very ordinary Peter Capaldi story, like Time Heist, and it's kind of been done. It's kind of like an episode of Hustle done in Doctor Who, but it does everything to entertain me really, really well. And the hot take culture that existed kind of goes, well, it's not all that great. And I'm like going, like, what are you expecting? Like, I'm sorry, I want all my novels to be War and Peace. Like, no.
They can't all be top tens. By definition,
No.
Some stories have to be bottom tier.
Exactly. And even if they're bottom tier, if they're entertaining, they're great. Like I'm currently watching Star Trek Brave New Stranger World, and the first two episodes were really, really great, and the third episode was not bad. It's set in Toronto, which is kind of cool, and the rest of it's terrible, but you know what? I was entertained by it. So that's fine. It made me happy for like 55 minutes. That's not actually a bad thing to do in this world.
And for the record, I didn't hate Star Trek Picard, but we got to talk about the last episode. All the young people are hypnotized by space TikTok and become enemies of the state. And the only people who can save the day are your coworkers from 30 years ago, because the best time of your life was always the job you had 30 years ago and never the job you're doing right now.
Everything you described is absolute wish fulfillment with me. In 10 years, you will see it my way. Trust me.
In 10 years, when I'm 52, I will see it your way. Stacey, how about for you? What makes a Doctor Who story great? And then I'll double back and ask you whether or not the Five Doctors fits that criteria.
I think for me, what makes a Doctor Who story great is its originality. And that might seem like a funny answer when we're talking about the Five Doctors, because the Five Doctors is in many ways this kind of like remix. But I think also, like, one of the things I actually loved most about the Five Doctors first round was the Raston Warrior robot. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I remember they advertised it and they said, like, you know, old enemies, and there was flashes of Daleks inside them and whatever, and new ones too. And they put the Raston Warrior robot in there. And I was like, oh, that's so exciting. And that thing was so cool. And so it's not like everything has to be brand new all the time, but I feel like there should be something new done with it. And I just watched Cold War yesterday from Matt Smith era, and it's like there's nothing new here, like just nothing. And it just felt so leaden. Whereas I feel like with the Five Doctors, although they're retreading ground, they're doing new stuff, right? And you're putting combinations of, you know, characters together who, you know, in you know, ways that seem like they're familiar, but they're not really. Like, you know, the second Doctor and the Brigadier are kind of like going off Earth together. Like that basically didn't happen. That didn't happen in the second Doctor's era. It happened in like the Three Doctors, but like, you know, this isn't quite exactly what you think. Like the third Doctor says he's reversing the polarity of the neutron flow because it's his classic line, and yet he only said it once in his run. Like, you know, there's a lot of stuff like that where Terrance is actually kind of creating this mythos by pretending that he's just redoing it, but actually like that story is so brilliant, I think, and for such an odd kind of beast. And I think Terrance Dicks excels when he's given these like really weird challenges. I think, you know, in the 90s he did like Shakedown, which is this very odd kind of like, you know, Sontarans, you kind of the Doctor in it, and then he novelizes it and puts the Doctor in anyway, and so on. And it's like he knows how to bolt together all these disparate aspects. And what we know of the production behind the scenes is like, this shouldn't have worked. This should not have, you know, or at best it should have been this hodgepodge that just barely made it watchable. And yet it is so watchable. Like Dave says, you can just watch this thing again and again and again. And I also have too.
Not only that, I think the novelization of Shakedown is better than the video because it's Terrance doing Philip Marlowe in space.
Yes.
And you have two of the companions masquerading as Pinkerton's detectives in the 30th century, which is a hilarious idea. And you have Bernice on a planet-wide university, which I am positive Stephen Moffat quote-unquote borrowed when doing Silence in the Library. So, yeah, I think elements... and then, of course, you have the sophisticated Ogron who runs a police outpost on an outer space Las Vegas-style planet. These are all much more creative things than you get in Shakedown the video, which is basically a bottle episode. But I digress. Dave, you gave me a big thumbs up when Stacey mentioned the Raston Warrior robot. How much does that stick out for you?
Well, I mean, to answer the question you asked, Stacey, you know, I think my important thing about Doctor Who, what makes a good story, for me, it's evolved. I mean, when I was a kid, it was the monsters. I was a total monster kid, and I loved seeing monsters, and I got bored with, you know, serials that didn't have them, like Kinda and stuff. But now, you know, of course, there's the writing, and Kinda's, you know, one of my favorite episodes now, as is Warrior's Gate. I think it's amazing. I didn't understand what the hell was going on then, but now Warrior's Gate is without a doubt my top 20. But Raston Robot has always been my favorite scene in this. It's just, it was a unique monster, a new thing. It was so visually cool. And I loved it. And that's why I gave it a big thumbs up when Stacey started talking about it, because those were my favorites. So that and the Yeti is, you know, the Yeti scene, because I'd never seen a Yeti before. You know, I mean, look at, I mean, this might be true for a lot of people, but this wasn't only the first fifth Doctor story that I saw. It was the first Doctor story that I saw, the first second Doctor story I saw, the first third Doctor story I saw. This was a big treat. I mean, it was amazing. And, you know, it had some old monsters, some that I'm familiar with. And it was the first time I ever saw the new Cybermen, and I was kind of disappointed in them. I was a huge Cyberman fan, still am. But, you know, I like the writing. I now I'm more about that. But again, this stands apart for just being fun, and I just want to have fun when I watch this stuff now. You know, and that's why it's so watchable. Yeah, again, when I just watched it for this podcast, I smiled all the way through it, literally.
So, Dave, you mentioned that this was your first and second and third Doctor story. When you finally cycled around to the Hartnell era, was it a surprise to not see Richard Hurndall as the first Doctor?
No, it wasn't, because before I actually saw the Five Doctors, I believe I already had a copy of Doctor Who Celebration, so I knew a lot about what was going on there. That was released a few months earlier. And I also had this magazine, that the 20th anniversary magazine with all the monsters and episodes and all that kind of stuff, explaining everything, and with plenty of pictures of William Hartnell as well. So no, I knew what was going on, so I was not disappointed.
Yeah, that magazine was also my Bible. Like, I loved that thing.
Oh my God. I gotta, to be honest, this is a new copy that I got maybe 10 years ago. The first copy I had, I borrowed from a friend, and I never gave it back to him. And it just fell apart because I read it so many times.
Yeah, I also replaced my copy because it was so dog-eared, and I put the posters up on my wall and everything. It was great.
Yeah. This is a independent publication.
Radio Times.
Yeah, Radio Times put this out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You've never seen this?
I've never seen that.
Oh wow,
it's amazing. Yeah,
I mean, it's got great stuff on the monsters.
Yeah, it has synopses of all the episodes, which I think were written by Ian Levine. So little, one paragraph summaries of things. So stuff you had no access to. It's describing. It's
blurbs about every companion.
Oh wow,
it's really great. It's really
great. Of Colin Baker, who hadn't been the Doctor yet, but
there's an introduction on the very last page of Colin Baker,
looking very, very young and svelte, and with much less bouffant hair than he was sporting when he was actually in the role. Yeah.
So this was my Bible for a long time. That and in the companion piece of Celebration, which is an amazing tome still.
I will have to borrow your copy and then never give it back. Yeah. And then read it until it falls apart.
The tradition will continue.
Graeme, let me get you back in here. Now, we've talked a lot about the nostalgia aspects of Five Doctors, but isn't it fair to say that Five Doctors actually does a lot to move the needle in telling a new story and kicking the mythology off in a whole different direction, not dissimilar to what Robert Holmes had done several years earlier in Deadly Assassin?
I think it's the whole way it brings everybody together. I think it's the whole Death Zone concept. Like the problem I often have with multi-Doctor stories is the story that brings them together is very, very slight. I really am not stupendously wild about the Three Doctors, like the whole notion that this is the gravest of emergencies, and we'll just plunk in Patrick Troughton just to go argue with John Pertwee. That'll save the day. It's not quite. It doesn't really feel kind of. And then they just kind of wander around a quarry and look like every single other episode from that era. It kind of, yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed the Three Doctors. Don't get me wrong, but it's not quite. And you look at stories like the Two Doctors. It tries to kind of bring it into some sort of actual happenstance where the Sixth Doctor has to go on a rescue mission. And you go to the modern series, you got story, it's a story like Twice Upon a Time, which, and you just kind of go, how are these guys together? I don't get it. But I love the Death Zone. The Death Zone actually gives it a purpose. The whole idea of, I love it when Philip Latham, as Barusa says, it's a game within a game, and he's just idly playing with one of the pieces, and I just love that aspect of it, and I love the fact that just giving it that kind of a thing actually makes it all work, and it makes all the nostalgia pieces work, but it also gives it a kind of, how are you going to get there, and how is this going to work, and all the above between below stuff is great, and it's a lovely kind of quest story, and I actually do think it sticks the landing. I think the whole I think the whole, first Doctor has got the solution and let Barusa get immortality is the answer was just a nice touch. Like, so yeah, for me, the game is the thing that really kind of makes it special. I mean, there's individual things in it that are really good, I think, and some of it's just circumstance. Like, I would have loved to have seen the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane again, but I have to say, Liz Sladen and John Pertwee really work well together, and I'm really kind of happy it turned out that way. And I just I'm very kind of, and by the same token, I also really like Patrick Troughton and Nick Courtney together. Like, I just think all the kind of pieces worked in really good ways. And it felt there's a certain specialness to how the whole thing feels. Like they really feel like this is a big deal, guys. We got to do this one right. And I'm not the biggest fan of Peter Moffat. I feel he directs things somewhere between indifference and was he actually there? But this one I feel is almost director proof in a way, because it just had so much goodness going on, and one of the best sequences was actually directed by John Nathan Turner. So there you go. But yeah, but I think it's a kind of aware of it. It's aware of its specialness, and I think Terrance has really done a good job at kind of plotting it, making it all kind of fit together, which is really great.
Stacey, shall you say it this time, or do you want me to say it again?
I'll do it. Graeme. You are so wrong.
So, Stacey, let me then ask you the same question. Does Five Doctors do a good job of moving the needle forward, even though it pretends to be a simple one-dimensional nostalgia fest?
Yes, I think it has a lot of the sort of present day Time Lord kind of like stuff that's happening, that like there's direct references to Arc of Infinity that had just sort of happened the previous year. You've got kind of like, Chancellor Flavia becoming effectively president, which is something Terrance revisits a lot in his like novels and stuff. You've got a lot of kind of like ongoing things happening in the present. And I think you sort of got the Doctors as like they're just kind of there, which is like it's really nice. They just kind of like tone up and they're just hanging around doing their thing. And they're like, yeah, we got to go back to our own time streams. Like, but we're visiting here. And I just really like how like it just feels very current, I think, in a funny way, even though it is by definition backwards looking. It doesn't seem like it is, and I think that's the genius of Terrance. He's just so effortless at making these things work, and you can tell he's kind of like going like, right, okay, where's the current state of Time Lord politics? It's not like he knew that. He had to go research that and figure that out, and he's like, right, we'll build on that. And so it's just very admirable, like watching this all come together.
And Dave, same question for you.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, the funny thing is, Stacey mentioned Arc of Infinity continuity. One thing I noticed, the Commander doesn't wear a helmet in Five Doctors, just like Colin Baker refused to wear his.
Colin was so tall, and the helmet was so tall, he literally could not walk through doors.
But yeah, I mean, it does. It plays with the Time Lord lore. And, again, Stephen Moffat cribbing kind of, and the fact that regenerations can be reassigned, reoffered a whole new set of them as they offer the Master in this. So,
and they later give to the Doctor in Time of the Doctor. They
exactly.
send a whole new life cycle glowing through the wormhole.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's a lot of continuity of Time Lord lore that it lives on that was founded in this very serial.
I think that the Master actually is a really funny character in this, because I was noticing this time around how like he just like he really tries. He's like, yeah, I'm going to rescue the Doctor. It's going to be great. And then the lightning bolts only go for him, and you're kind of like, okay, apparently like the game of Rassilon just hates the Master so much, and then everybody like is like, oh yeah, come on, as if we trust you. And he's like, no, seriously, this time I'm really honestly on your side, and he gets duped by all the Doctors. Like they like take his proof like again and again, and it's like, wait. You have one piece of proof and you just like it's so clear the Master is so unused to trusting anyone, he doesn't know how to do it. So he's like, oh yeah, I'll give the Doctor my honest proof, and the Doctor puts it in his pocket. And you're like, okay, well I'll give the other Doctor my recall button. It's sort of like, yep, no, he's like, yeah, it's very funny. And then he's just like he can't catch a break. And it's really, really hilarious. And I think just this the idea that they they originally were like, well, let's make it the master behind everything, and then they were like, that's just way too obvious. Let's mix it up. It was really brilliant. Like that's another example of like, yeah, the obvious thing just isn't going to work here. Like, because everybody would know that it's the master, so we'll mix it up and make him on the Doctor's side. That's a stroke of genius, and I can watch that all day.
And one of the best parts about what you're saying is Anthony Ainley's first scene in this, when he sits down, I mean, he's the full range of emotions you've ever seen from the master in any episode he's ever been in like a minute and a half. It's hilarious. He's in disbelief, and then he can't believe the Doctor's going to be gone from his universe. I mean, well, talk about continuity that is throughout the master and the Doctor's relationship from, the third Doctor to, the current Doctor. It's like, they can't live without each other, and they always play. They can't imagine a universe without each other, and it's very important to the dynamic, and it's established here as well. I think it's reaffirmed here. I mean, again, the third Doctor plays on that a little bit, perhaps a little bit too deviously, when he said it'll be a lot of fun to see him murder people, but essentially try to stop him to do it. But anyways, I agree. The master is amazing in this. I mean, Anthony, maybe at first I'm like, I was like, man, this is the most scenery he's ever chewed, but it's merited.
Yeah, it is. Like, he's like the cat who swallowed the cream when he's sitting with the Time Lord. It's just like, he's like, oh, now you want me here, like you want me back. He's like, you can just tell he's been like, I've been invited into the inner sanctum of the Time Lord Council, and they want me. Like, he's like, I can't quite believe this is happening, even though it's kind of everything I wanted.
And even before that, he's owning the place. He sits. He asks to sit down after he sits down.
Yeah, that's right.
It's so great. And he goes, "What makes you think I want your forgiveness?" I mean, I love that.
Let me play the audio clip.
Lord President, Castellan, Chancellor Flavia. This is a very great and, may I say, a most unexpected honor. I may be seated. Now then, what can I do for you?
You are one of the most evil and corrupt beings this Time Lord race has ever produced. Your crimes are without number, and your villainy without end. Nevertheless, we are prepared to offer you a full and free pardon.
What makes you think I want your forgiveness?
We can offer you an alternative to your renegade existence.
Regeneration. A complete new life cycle.
What must I do?
Rescue the Doctor.
What?
Graeme, bearing in mind what James Courray Smith said on this show last week about Terrance is just writing for the master as if he's still a Roger Delgado, is this Anthony Ainley's best story from his approximately 10 years on Doctor Who?
I think it's one of the two. It's this and Survival. And I think in both cases, he was given a script where he, I think there was always an expectation that he play the master very OTT. Anthony Ainley is not a very OTT actor, actually. You watch him in other things. You watch him in The Pallisers. You watch him in Upstairs, Downstairs. He actually really modulates his part really well, and he's a very, very smart actor. He goes to Doctor Who, and it's actually there were actually, I think it was David Howe who was in the booth, who was in the director's booth, and during Planet of Fire, and they actually gave him the note. Could you do that a little more OTT? Anthony, thank you. And like an actual note was, please overact. I think he was given more conversational dialogue, which is great. That scene in your clip is amazing because it is Terrance writing for Roger Delgado for sure. I actually agree with James on that, but I also think it's actually giving him the opportunity to just be conversational, whereas most of the scenes are structured by other writers and frankly directors and frankly producer Fiat to be a new body at last. It's always meant to have very, very, could you just be a little more OTT? So yeah, that is kind of how they want that's how they want Ainley to be. So here they basically have decided, they just gave him dialogue where he has to be conversational. Well, how do what makes I love him in this scene. His delivery, one of my favorite lines of him is when he says, yeah, we will give you a full pardon. And he says, what makes you think I want your forgiveness? I just love the way he says that. It is just exactly the right tone of irony, sneering, and just, are you fucking kidding me? That you just can't actually, he doesn't actually usually hit that mark. He's actually another performance where he's actually very good. I don't think he's as good as the Five Doctors or Survival, but Trial of the Time Lord 13 is another one where he gets to be conversational. He's stuck in that TV screen, and he's left to be Captain Exposition. So of course he's going to be more conversational. Anytime you get Anthony Ainley the opportunity to just be conversational, he'll nail it, because he's actually a really much better actor than I think anyone gives him credit for.
I was watching that exact segment on Pluto TV a few nights ago. They run Trial of a Time Lord every 5 days. Yeah, you're right. That scene is remarkable. It's just a shame that he's shot in very, very deep background, and there's zero close. He's giving the most important line of the entire season.
Yeah,
the Doctor, or the Valiard, as I've always known him,
the Doctor. Yeah,
but there's no close up, which is just a complete failure of the camera script. But I digress. Next question. We've talked a bit about the state of Time Lord mythology. Terrance, remember, invented the Time Lords in 1969. Terrance also commissioned the second Time Lord story, The Three Doctors. Terrance, as far as I know, did not have any involvement with the commissioning or writing of Deadly Assassin, but he did novelize it several years before writing Five Doctors. So you don't have a Time Lord story in Doctor Who unless Terrance Dicks is involved in it. And the novelization that he wrote immediately before Five Doctors is Arc of Infinity, which is another Time Lord story that he didn't directly write or commission. So I want to ask Stacey, when Terrance creates the Harp of Rassilon, which has a major plot function, is this Terrance making fun of his old buddy Robert Holmes?
I think it probably is. I mean, the Time Lords is very austere kind of beings in the Deadly Assassin, and by the time of the 80s, like, they're just these kind of like goofy like 80s people sitting around tables, and so yeah, of course he has a harp. Like, why not? It's, I mean, I feel like it could have been the guitar of Rassilon, and we would have been like, sure, like that's just a thing. So yeah, I mean. I love the harp. I must say, I love the musical key. When I was 10 years old, and the Doctor's plucking the harp, being like, "Where's the code? Where's the code?" He's like, "Oh, it's in the painting." I was like, "Oh my god, that is amazing!" Like, I just adored that as a kid. I was like, yeah.
So, Dave, did you ever take harp lessons because you wanted to learn how to play the Rassilon theme tune that Peter Davison plays towards the end of this story?
No. I didn't. I'm not musically inclined. Never have been. I can't even, hum a tune.
Well, Graeme, you have your own music podcast. Have you ever considered learning the melody of Rassilon? And I'm sure it's called that, the melody of Rassilon.
No, I have not, because I can't play a lick of music. But I do love Doctor Who the Music 2, which is the album that the suite from the Five Doctors is on, because it doesn't actually include the harp bit, but it does include that little harp-like strain as the Doctor is wandering around the room trying to figuring out what it is, which is a lovely piece of music by Peter Howell. So. Not much of an answer to the direct answer to your question, but any shout out to Peter Howell is well earned, I think.
I was today years old when I learned that Peter Howell dropped the harp in as a minor spoiler before the Doctor discovers that the harp is the answer.
Yeah, it's like dun 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 dun. Yeah, it's a lovely little piece. Yeah.
So speaking of the harp of Rassilon, that brings us basically to my next point. Terrance did not invent Barusa, but his buddy Robert Holmes did, and Terrance had novelized all three of Barusa's previous appearances. So, first of all, Dave, you probably would not have known who Barusa was when you're watching this on opening night, but what did you think of the revelation at the end that Barusa is the bad guy all along? Spoiler alert for a 40-year-old story.
No, I actually did know Bruce because he was in. Wasn't he in the Invasion of Time?
Ark of Infinity, yes. Ark of
No,
Infinity.
Invasion of Time.
Right, Invasion of Time, yes.
Yeah, Ark of Infinity I had not seen yet. But no, it was kind of obvious to me too, I think. Given the hands, I didn't think it was going to be the Master because obviously he was out in the Forbidden Zone. But he just looks evil and manipulative all throughout this entire show, and it's got to be someone we know. So I wasn't surprised. Although I'm not sure I remember thinking that while I'm watching the show. I was just having too much fun watching, Yeti and Cybermen and stuff.
Stacey, you had on the internet 30 years ago described Quantum Leap as a series of murder mysteries with one possible suspect. Do you have the same take on Barusa in this story?
I was just about to go for that. That's awesome. I can't believe you remembered my line. That's exactly what Quantum Leap was. Yeah, and I don't think it suffers for it. I think that they don't play it like it's this gigantic revelation that we should be shocked by. And I think as a kid, I probably didn't see it. I don't remember quite what I thought, but I can't remember guessing it particularly. But I don't think it's really set up to be this mega mystery, oh my God, I can't believe it was Barusa all along, because I think once you've killed the Castellan, and like Dave says, the Master's in the zone, or who else has you got? I mean, it's not Flavia, and so there's not a whole lot of suspects left, and that's okay. That's really okay because I think in the novelization, the way that Terrance describes the Fifth Doctor seeing Barusa in the game zone is he was more disappointed than surprised, and you're yeah, that's right. It's I certainly knew who Barusa was because we'd had Doctor Who on rotation. It played every single night or every weeknight, and so through John Pertwee, Tom Baker, Peter Davison years, and we just went around and around. So yeah, to me, I was oh yeah, cool. Here's Barusa. It makes sense. He's in there. I did not either notice or care that it was a different actor every single time. It was Barusa. So for me, I think it really worked. I don't know if I guessed in this particular story, but it certainly worked as oh wow, this is a character that we've known a long time. It worked very similar to me to Mike Yates being the traitor in Invasion of the Dinosaurs, because this is a well-established character. And I feel at that time, you didn't have this kind of inter-story continuity like that. Characters just were static, and that was okay. That's just how it was. And so the idea of characters who turn out, to be evil or something that you've known for a long time was really shocking when it happened.
This is where fan culture in the 1980s kind of does me in, because not only did I read the novelization before I saw the TV story, but I had all the significant plot details of it spoiled by people who had actually watched it, including the fact that Barusa was behind it. Now, so it wasn't it was kind of a bit of a surprise in the respect that I really liked Philip Latham's portrayal, and it is kind of a nice little volte face when he actually turns out to be his real intentions are revealed. But the other thing about it is that I really love the kind of grandfatherly Barusa from the Invasion of Time. He's so is it John Arnott? Yeah, it's John Arnott. He is so charming and so lovely, and so it is a shock, because every time I watch this Barusa turn heel, I go, but he was lovely grandfather figure two stories ago. This isn't fair. But on the other hand, you look at the version from the Deadly Assassin. You can believe that guy would make that kind of decision. So it feels correct. I guess is what I'm saying, but it is also shocking. You look at what happens with the Barusa here, and you think about what happened with Angus Mackay. It all makes sense. You can see that, we'll just have to adjust the truth. Yes, I will play the game of Rassilon, and I will get immortality. You can picture Angus Mackay's, Barusa doing that. So yeah, it all fits together.
And of course, Terrance in the 1990s did bring Barusa back in a couple of his original novels, and he advanced Barusa's storyline a little bit further. But Graeme, let's start with you. At the end, when they're all in Rassilon's tomb, there is this ancient plinth that has Old High Gallifreyan, the ancient language of the Time Lords, and all three doctors at the same time start to say, "Fortunately, I know how to read it." Does this suggest anything new for you in terms of the Doctor's past mythology? And where do you think that moved the needle in terms of how Doctor Who treats the Doctor going forward, particularly with regard to the McCoy era?
I suppose you could actually make a case for that, and I suspect Stacey will. But I won't, because honestly, I just think it's the Doctor bragging, the Doctor doing their shtick of humble bragging, which frankly is one of the most endearing things they always do in situations like this. Yes, you can sort of see some form of, I don't know, retro closure that this is actually possible, but I yeah, you're trying to make me care about the other from the Virgin New Adventures, and I'm sorry, Jason, your ploy won't work.
And Stacey and Dave, I assume both of you want to disagree with that vociferously.
Hell yeah.
But Stacey, in terms of the Cartmel master plan, do you think some of that owes to the fact that the Doctor secretly knows how to read this ancient language that should have been for a million years before he was born?
Well, my own fan theory is actually he knew it was Greek, but he also knew that, like, the Brigadier and Sarah and Tegan wouldn't actually know that it was Greek, so they were just like playing along. Say, oh yes, I totally know this. I got this from my old High Gallifreyan lessons. I didn't take it as being like, oh, this is a hint that he was around in the old High Gallifreyan times. I took it as a hint of, like, he's a very learned man. He knows how to read ancient languages. It would be the same as if it was in Latin and somebody said, oh, fortunately I know how to speak Latin. I don't think I would immediately think they were alive in Roman times. I would think like, oh yes, you understand old things. But I like your theory a lot. I was kind of like, oh yeah, right. That could also be a little like Easter egg there for being like, oh yeah, the Doctor's always known this, and actually maybe how is a good question.
In the Cartmel master plan, it is written in the books that the Doctor would have been a contemporary and colleague of Rassilon, although you can't really necessarily draw that from Rassilon's brief encounter in this story. But Dave, what's your take on the same question?
Initially, no. I never thought that, especially learning that Cartmel never really knew much about prior Doctor Who to his own era. But much like Stacey, I agree. I think it's like, they learn the nursery rhyme and above, between, below, or whatever it is, to enter Rassilon's tomb in nursery school, and they probably learned High Gallifreyan in high school, or maybe even middle school. So that's what I just assume. He's just a learned fellow. He's a guy who knows a lot, and we already know that about the Doctor anyway. So why wouldn't he know that?
So I just checked the book, and on page 121, when Rassilon is awake and talking, and he's talking to Barusa, and then when he indicates the Doctors, he says, "and these others." So that's a total clue for the Cartmel master plan. He calls them others.
I can imagine that the only book that Cartmel was given to read before getting hired on as script editor was his novelization of the Five Doctors, and that's probably where he got the entire master plan from. Dave, I know what your answer is going to be already to the next question. To special edition or not to special edition?
I don't watch any of the special editions. I mean, that's just blasphemy to me, man. I mean, I don't swear in church. I don't watch special editions, period. In fact, I don't even go to church. So that's no way. I know what they're about. I wasn't even curious. I might have saw one clip of one of them on YouTube many, many years ago, and I'm like, what is the point? So no, thank you.
Stacey, I know you've given nuanced answers in the past as to the special edition, but what about it do you like or not like? And do you think it's fair that for the longest time, the special edition was the only version of the story that ended up being commercially available?
Yeah, I think the problem with the special edition was like they were doing two things at once, and one is they were trying to like upgrade some special effects, and the other was they were trying to change some story parts. And I think you know, I feel like you can do one or the other, but like doing both was that was quite blasphemous, as Dave says. I think that like for me, actually, I will watch special editions of things, especially if I'm showing them to someone else. Like you know, I definitely show the special edition of Kinder to people because it saves on the embarrassing snake, because it forces people to like just dismiss the whole thing, and it's like they don't take the spirit of it. They go, oh my god, look at that terrible prop. And so for me, the special editions can be okay. I will often watch you know, the DVD versions of things, and you know, Day of the Dalek special edition is really fascinating and so on. But this Five Doctors one, it's such the, you know, the clearly the first attempt at it. And I get what they're trying to do in a lot of things, and they're showing alternate versions of the scenes, and they're showing like cut bits and so on. And yet it kind of also undercuts it a lot. So yeah, I kind of agree with Dave on this one. Like, I don't watch the special edition of the Five Doctors when I'm watching it. I might, if I'm going to watch the special edition of the Five Doctors, it's because I want to see the special edition for some reason. I wouldn't pick that even to show to a newbie, because it just distorts it too much.
So, Graeme, does the special edition improve on your enjoyment of the Five Doctors?
Oh, God, no. I remember watching it for the first time and just going, how is this added to anything? Like the Five Doctors original cut was just absolutely perfect. And then we went through this period sort of between the release of the special edition on VHS through the initial DVD releases, where it was the only version available. It was as though, like the works of Copernicus, it was basically the original version was like meant to be like completely taken away and burned, and that really offended me, because I loved the original version of the Five Doctors. I think the cut is amazing. I think the obelisk effect is so much more effective. I think you cannot do 3 minutes of corridor shots and make it menacing, but you can just open on them having a pleasant conversation in the TARDIS that kind of introduces a new console. That's cool. Yeah, everything about I hate everything about the special edition, but more than that, I hate the fact that there was like literally an 8-year period when it basically attempted to like supplant everything, and it's one of those things. And so when the actual special edition of the Five Doctors finally came out on DVD, there was much rejoicing in the Burk household, because not only did it have like the original version as I remembered it and as I wanted it, but it also had a secret commentary with David Tennant and Phil Collinson. So who cannot love that? And Helen Rayner. So
I had been spoiled that there was a hidden commentary track as an Easter egg, and that was the first thing I looked for. So that was the first way that I watched that special edition DVD. But I'll tell you that when I was trying to last week find the audio clip of Rassilon speaking in the tomb, because my cold open last week is how I had the mother of all VCR malfunctions, and my VCR, the first time that I was taping this, cut out as Barusa was putting on the ring. I was trying to play the exact audio from where my VCR tape cut out in early 1985, and of course that VCR tape is long gone.
Oh man!
And even if I had it, I got nothing to play it on. But I could not, for the life of me, anywhere find online the actual original version of the line. All I could find on YouTube or on any available download was the remastered version done by the special edition, because they didn't like the way the original Rassilon spoke. Finally, Daily Motion I had to hold my phone up to the screen as Daily Motion is playing and get the line that way rather than a direct edit.
I think the arrogance of the special edition bothers me more than anything else, because first of all, there have been subsequent special editions of other things. I like most of them, actually. I really like the special edition of Day of the Daleks, for example. I think they actually do a magnificent job kind of, fixing the mistakes Paul Bernard made. But they also left the original version of Day of the Daleks on the disc and on the subsequent Blu-ray release, that, we have both. That's all I wanted, and I wanted the freedom of choice. And it was the arrogance that this is the version that you should like, and this is the version that we will put out, and this is and our version, we want to second guess all the decisions made during the production. And I'm just like, No, I'm sorry. The actor playing this is the game of Rassilon is amazing. It is it is Campus Christmas, and that is fucking Doctor Who. And if you're not on board for that, why should I even know you? So no, so changing out to this is the game of Rassilon. What the hell? It's wrong, Jason. Just wrong.
I forget who made that editorial change, but that person who made that change was on Rec Arts Doctor Who in the late 90s. And I specifically said, why would you change the voice? And knowing that I have a very caricature Brooklyn accent, he says to me, he says to me, how would you like it if the original Rassilon spoke in a cartoon Brooklyn accent? I'm like, I love it.
Let's go. Anything's better than this.
But he said that was the equivalent. He said,
it's not even a very good kind of, it's just like, let's just play with the phase and pitching just so we can, like, make it less fruity. And I'm like going, then you've kind of missed the whole freaking point of the performance, which is that it is meant to be that camp because frankly it's Rassilon and he's God and he's like, yeah, hey, come on and have my fun time place. I'm going to turn you into stone. It's awesome.
And as a thought experiment, Stacey, you make your living as a mathematician, to be a little reductive. In the special edition of this story, the most notable feature is that Richard Hurndall uses the wrong sequence of numbers for pi. Then there was a retake, and then they used the retake for the TV edit. And in fact, I learned about pi pretty much thanks to the Five Doctors because we began our unit on circles and pi in school. I was still in the 6th grade, about 2 weeks after the Five Doctors aired. So my knowledge of pi largely comes from this story. If they had used the special edition edit where Hurndall gets the numbers wrong, and that had been the broadcast version, do you imagine a scenario where you walk into math class and you give the wrong answer to the question because Five Doctors led you astray, and then you never become a mathematician?
Yeah, it would have ruined me. So I was actually already on the path because it was Logopolis that made me a mathematician, or at least want to be one. So yes, I think the BBC would have been inundated with letters had they got the number for pi wrong. So like I'm very pleased that they did retake in this scene because like that would have been disastrous. And I agree with you. I think this is often the point of Doctor Who. This is how kids get access to science and to cool stuff, is through this kind of fun fictional way. And I love that. I think that is such a great way to learn. So yeah, I'm really pleased that you knew pi because of this. And what better way to learn? Like you learn through fun things. That is excellent. And yeah, I know it's. I mean, I think they designed the pyramids and they didn't know fully what pi was. And then people said they had real trouble redesigning some of those chambers the same way. And it was like, well, why don't you go back to the old value of pi? And maybe if they'd used the Richard Hurndall pi, we would have had those pyramid chambers cracked.
All right, so as we start to wrap up, I'll start off with you, Graeme. What are some of the best lines of dialogue that Terrance writes for us in The Five Doctors? Perhaps lines that you might still be quoting today.
I still love, and I've even used on a BBC interview, a universe where the Doctor scarcely bears thinking. So yeah, I have used that. I actually used a variant on that. It was like, I was asked by Matthew C. what it would have been like had Sidney Newman, not been born and not happened. I just said a universe with Sidney Newman scarcely bears thinking, Matthew. So yeah, I absolutely love that line. It's all of Troughton's lines are really great. I just love, age is not mellowed, you brigadier. It's all little things. Those are the things I quote all the time. But yeah, there's just so much in it that's just great that way. I love the closing lines. You're just gonna travel around on the run in a rackety old TARDIS. Well, why not? That's how it all started. And I just love that exchange. It's hokey as hell, but I don't care. It's earned it.
Yeah, that is a good one. Stacey, how about you? What are some of the best lines in Five Doctors.
I think almost every interaction that the second Doctor and the Brigadier have, and when the Doctor is singing the little nursery rhyme, and the Brigadier's like, "Are you in pain?" He just, like when they arrive in the death zone, he's like, "Charming place, Doctor." Like it's just non-stop sarcasm, and they play off each other so well. And so I just love every single interaction that they have.
There is a similar line that Troughton gets off to Nicholas Courtney. The Brigadier asks, "Is that helpful?" And then Troughton goes, "Considerably more than you are."
Yeah. Yes. Have I ever led you astray? It's like on many occasions. Then
Well,
this will be
consider
the
this the
exception.
It's funny. I actually literally just quoted one in a text about. It was actually Friday, last Friday, so it was 4 days ago. I was at an ice rink in Los Angeles that happens to have the restored original Zamboni ever made, and for those who are not familiar with Zamboni, it's the big machine that cleans the ice in between periods in a hockey game. And I took some pictures with it and of it. I'm kind of a hockey nerd myself, much like you're a baseball nerd. And I texted the pictures to fellow hockey nerd and Doctor Who podcaster Stephen Shapansky. We talk about hockey quite a bit, back and forth a little bit via text. And I sent him a picture. I says, the original, you might say. So yeah, that I mean, I think the first Doctor really shines in this one, in a lot of ways. But yeah, they all have great lines. There's so many.
And what was your of all the many performers in this story, who was your favorite guest performer? Who really opened your eyes and gave you a new perspective on the show?
It was definitely Patrick Troughton. I think that I think the weakest part of the Five Doctors is the direction. I think a lot of the acting is a bit wooden, and it just could have used a director with a bit more pep. I completely understand why they went with Peter Moffat, because like they needed something done and they needed it in the can, and he's the kind of guy who could get stuff in the can, but he wasn't the kind of guy who could like pull things out of the actors especially well, I think. And so that's always been just a little bit of a drag here. This is why it's not in my top 5 when I did that random top 5 at the beginning, because it just doesn't quite sing the way I really wish it did. And yet Patrick Troughton does. And for me, I think I'd seen Patrick Troughton in the Three Doctors as well. This is probably my second time encountering him, and it wasn't long afterwards that they suddenly started showing the Crotons and the Seeds of Death in the rotation as well. So they would show them just before the John Pertwee run. So I knew him a little bit, but not really. And then he just owns the whole show, and you're just like, this is incredible. Like you can really see why he was such a favorite and such a just a strong actor all the time. Whereas the others are kind of, they're not quite phoning it in, but they haven't found their character after such long of being away, or in some cases like they haven't been the Doctor before, like the first Doctor. But Patrick Troughton just comes in with just everything flying at once.
Yeah. Well, no, that is actually gonna be my answer, though. I mean, although the first Doctor, the first Doctor has a lot of great lines, but Patrick Troughton is also the thing I really wanted to see, because I've heard so much about his performance. Before I came to see this in particular, a lot of people say the second Doctor, they miss him. It's really sad to know that most of his episodes at the time were missing. And he's just a different animal, and he's still acting, crazy, and he's got some fun stuff. And I love his entrance in this. That's one of my favorite scenes. His entrance when he says thank you when the sergeant goes to grab him and his coat comes off.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely love that. And I have to agree with Stacey. Absolutely, Patrick Troughton is one of my favorite things, and I really wanted to see more of him immediately after this.
So, Graeme, other than Patrick Troughton, who in your eyes gave the most eye-opening performance? We'll take it as read that Patrick Troughton is your answer, but who else?
Patrick Troughton would be my answer, in part because, frankly, it's Patrick Troughton every time he plays the Doctor, reprises the role of the Doctor, he plays it a different way to how he played it on TV from 1966 and 1969, because he's just one of those character actors that kind of does it, forgets it, comes back to the script and says, well, how do I play that? And so my main complaint with the Three Doctors is that he isn't playing the character he played on television back in the 60s. The Two Doctors, he does a bit, but by that point he's kind of older, and it doesn't quite seem right. This is the perfect middle. This is the one where I feel like he's really kind of channeling the performance he gave in the 60s. So yes, that's why it would be my answer. Since I've been told by producer Fiat that I cannot actually answer with Patrick Troughton, I'm going to go with Carole Ann Ford, who I've always loved as an actress. I think she is wonderful, and I think she's talented, and I think she's doing some great work here with not a lot. I really, but the second she comes on, she's just turned on Susan again. It's amazing. In spite of the fact that Richard Hurntle is nothing like William Hartnell, you believe this is the first Doctor regardless, because she puts her all into this being grandfather. And because Carole Ann Ford, as Susan, believes in him, I believe in him. In spite of the fact he's really not very good. But I just, I do, and why on earth, with better actors who could have played William Hartnell available in 1983, why did they go with him? I don't know. Nonetheless, Carole Ann Ford believes in him and is amazing. So yeah, I'll go with that as the kind of revelatory performance, even though she twists her ankle and doesn't get a lot to do for the rest of the story, which is a great shame.
So lastly, I want to ask the panel, after this conversation, are you rethinking your position, and are you now ready to declare Five Doctors as perhaps the best classic series story of them all?
I'm still going to say no. It might be the most fun. It's in a category where it's at the top of, without a doubt. And for me, there are a lot of categories of why I watch different serials of Doctor Who, different stories. And I've always considered it one of the best for sure, because it is fun, and that's all it's meant to be. And that's why I will always not be as critical of it.
So I think that the Five Doctors, somebody once described it as unreviewable. And I thought that was such an interesting term. I said, you can't review it because it's too in the DNA of us as Doctor Who fans. That it's finding an objective perspective on the Five Doctors is basically impossible. And I kind of went, that's the first time that I've ever heard a perspective that actually matches my own on the Five Doctors. I was like, yeah, it's such its own thing. And so it's very hard to put it in a top 10 list because that kind of makes it more like other Doctor Who, and it's just not. It's really a unique beast.
So, Graeme, with Five Doctors already in your top 5 all time, where do you think Five Doctors stands as Peter Davison's greatest story?
I think Peter Davison's greatest story is probably Earthshock, to be honest. With Crazy Androzani being the next one down. I think the Five Doctors would probably be third. And the reason why is that he was actually, I think it's almost kind of for the same reason that I think Earthshock is really great and Caves of Androzani is really great. He's being trusted with more material than he normally is. I think there was kind of a way of writing the Doctor that was very kind of, it's hard to explain. Like, I think the Davison Doctor was kind of given a sort of set role, and he wasn't really ever given enough kind of to show his mettle. And I think the Five Doctors, he's basically given Tom Baker's part, because Tom Baker is the one who goes to the tower, winds up in Gallifrey. All these things happen, and Davison gets the part and still keeps Tom Baker's lines, and he's great at them. And in the same way that Caves of Androzani is great because Robert Holmes kind of just basically writes for kind of an amalgam of Pertwee and Tom Baker, and Davison loves that kind of cadence. I think and Earthshock to a certain extent, even though Eric Sayer was script editor, I think he also just really kind of he needed the Doctor to be a very kind of He needed the Doctor very prominent in the action and made him far less passive than Sayward normally makes him. And so I think it's a stellar performance as a result. So I think all three of those things have that in common. I think, the Doctor is active. The Doctor's given some sarcasm, and Davison does sarcasm really well. He makes it seem kind of pleasant, but at the same time, you've been slapped, which is kind of an amazing trick when you think about it. And he makes the Doctor he makes the Doctor very smart. So he's given him kind of those great heroic opportunities in all three of those stories, and given an opportunity to just be kind of do a little bit more, which is kind of cool.
All right, Graeme, Stacey, Barsky, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. This is the biggest panel that I've ever had on Doctor Who literature, and I'm sure we've changed absolutely nobody's minds, but hopefully we have. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
One day, I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine.
Doctor Who, The Five Doctors, by Terrance Dicks, televised as The Five Doctors, teleplay by Terrance Dicks, televised November 23, 1983 globally, or November 25, 1983 in the UK. Paperback release date, November 24, 1983. Target book number, 81. Cover artist, Andrew Skilleter. Last week, in episode 81A, we covered chapters 1 through 7 of the novelization. We are now continuing on with chapter 8. The 4-part version of Five Doctors on TV uses Turlough and Susan's spotting of the Cybermen outside the TARDIS as its part 2 cliffhanger. You might well expect to find this at the end of chapter 6 of a Terrance 12-chapter novelization of a 4-part story, but here the moment falls on page 75, chapter 8, well more than halfway through the book. The chapter 6 ending of the Second Doctor and the Brigadier entering the cave system below the Dark Tower is hardly your standard cliffhanger moment. Chapter 8 includes another deleted scene, a very brief chat between Turlough and Susan in the TARDIS. This is one of those stories where Turlough doesn't get much to do, though Mark Strickson, as always, manages to find some business to stand out, such as his "thank you" line when the Fifth Doctor orders him to help Tegan serve refreshments in the TARDIS, which does not appear in the book, and thus is likely a Mark Strickson ad-lib designed in order to give Turlough, as I said, something to do. Five Doctors is not best remembered for Paul Jericho's performance as the Castellan, a returning character previously seen in Arc of Infinity, meaning, conveniently, that his 2 appearances occur in back-to-back Target releases. Jericho shot all his scenes for this story on one day, and his line readings do not always match the moment. Here's 2 classic examples of what fandom considers to be line misreadings.
And you can get me into the zone?
We have a power-boosted, open-ended transmat beam.
On Records Doctor Who in the 1990s, that was considered to be the used car salesman version of one of Gallifrey's highest elected officials. And who could forget?
Commander, you are authorized to use the Mind Probe.
What? No, not the Mind Probe.
Now, I'm not sure what's going on with that second line reading, but it's not in the novelization. Terrance instead writes, very top of page 80, quote, The Castellan shouted no, but the protest was quelled, and the guard dragged him roughly away. The TV version is what I call found poetry. It is not technically an improvement over Terrance's description in the book, but the reading is so infamous that I can't help but laugh with delight whenever I hear it. As with the best classic Who fluffs and blunders, the line as delivered is so much better than any more orthodox reading or the truncated moment in the book, and I will note that Terrance did reuse the "no, not the mind, probe" line at least once in his 1990s novels. Chapter 9 sees the return of an old friend, the Yeti, as previously novelized in The Abominable Snowman, episode 10 of this podcast, and The Web of Fear, episode 24. And it sees the arrival of a marvelous new monster, the Rastan Warrior Robot. And this is where I feel like the book is a little too rushed and cursory for an anniversary special, or maybe I've just been spoiled for detail and atmosphere so soon after having read the Terminus novelization. Terrance gives only a few short sentences to each monster. I do like the observation, page 87, quote, "It was hard to feel sorry for a Cyberman, but Sarah felt herself watching the slaughter of the silver giants with something very like pity. Before the flashing quicksilver movements of the robot, they were clumsy and helpless." End quote. The other major changes in Chapter 9 involve Sarah Jane first limply throwing a rock at a Cyberman. This was not broadcast, but was restored for the special edition, and then having a lot more trouble ziplining to the above entry to the tower, and finally the First Doctor having to punch an entry coder on TV to the between entry, whereas in the book he just rings the tower bell and the tower door opens. The end of Chapter 9 could have been a solid Part 3 cliffhanger, which is what the end of Chapter 9 is usually for. Page 92, quote, "3 doctors had entered the Dark Tower. Now the real danger would begin." Much better in Chapter 10 is the pie sequence, which takes up a full 7 pages of text. If Bits of Five Doctors is Terrance's greatest hits, this is an extrapolation from, and an improvement on, a similar sequence from Death to the Daleks, which Terrance commissioned and script edited, though if memory serves me right, Robert Holmes did most of the work on that story, and then himself borrowed from it in the Mars sequence in Pyramids of Mars. Terrance takes great delight in slaughtering this troop of Cybermen, even while paying much less attention to the Rastan Warrior Robot massacre in the previous chapter. Terrance also himself hand-waves past the explanation of how application of the Greek letter pi, which defines the mathematical value of the circle, and which was later built upon by Carl Sagan in the latter's novel, Contact, applies to a chessboard. When he has Tegan reflect on page 98, quote, "Tegan never did understand quite how the safe sequence worked, even when the doctor, her doctor, explained it to her later. All she could gather was that if you could observe exactly where the lightning bolts struck each time, and if you could then carry out some terrifyingly complex mathematical calculation at blinding speed, you might then be able to work out a way of crossing the second part of the board without setting off that trap." One gets the sense that Terrance is mocking the material, which is funny in this case because it's his own material being mocked. The Third Doctor's revelation that Mike Yates and Liz Shaw are phantoms is much more horrific in the book, ending Chapter 10 on a proper cliffhanger. Quote, "Suddenly he noticed that they were looking strange too, skin white and waxen, eyes burning fanatically. Hands outstretched like claws, they stalked silently towards him." Page 101 into 102. Peter Moffat had directed something similarly horrific in Season 18's State of Decay, but here on TV he decidedly underplays the moment. Chapter 11 raises some continuity questions. The Second Doctor identifies Jamie and Zoe as fakes, illusions, because Zoe has memories of the Brigadier, even though the Time Lords had wiped them in war games, Zoe in the book, Jamie on TV. This firmly establishes the Second Doctor of this story as a post-War Games Doctor, which ties in with the Season 6B theory, but this novelization is written in 1983, and the discontinuity guide does not come out until 1995. Terrance later endorsed Season 6B in his BBC Books fiction of the late 90s and the early 2000s, but again, The origin really seems to be in this story here. That's the first time that Patrick Troughton has memories from after his regeneration into Jon Pertwee. Now on TV, the Third Doctor, and Chapter 11, by the way, misidentifies Zoe and Jamie as the Third Doctor's companions. That's probably a typo that nobody picked up. Indicates that the Third Doctor hasn't even met Sarah Jane in his timeline yet, even though he recognized her by name earlier. The TV episodic edit concludes Part 3 with the Anthony Ainley Master creeping down a staircase, just after the Richard Hurndall Doctor tells Tegan that no, there's nothing here that can harm us. This falls on page 106 in the book, in the middle of Chapter 11. That is really late placement for a final cliffhanger. We're talking Malcolm Hulk novelization level late. He who condensed episodes 5 and 6 of The Sea Devils into like 10 pages of text. Terrance does include some material in the book that is not on either TV edition, broadcast, or special, such as Sarah Jane learning that the Fourth Doctor is the one trapped in the time vortex, or that she would have liked to have seen him again, for reasons later imagined by Russell T Davies in Season 2 of the new series, School Reunion. Interestingly, there's one Second Doctor Brigadier scene on TV, in both editions, that is not in the book. And it's a nifty little scene too, with a great line for the Second Doctor.
Have faith, Brigadier. Have I ever led you astray?
On many occasions.
Yes, well, this will be the exception. Come along.
When Borusa is revealed as the bad guy, Borusa, that invention of Robert Holmes, and whose 3 previous TV stories were all novelized by Terrance, including the book right before this one, Arc of Infinity, Book 80, Episode 80 of this podcast, Terrance has the Fifth Doctor reflect, page 115, that it's more with sadness than surprise. Borusa's dream of, quote, timeless, perpetual, bodily regeneration, by the way, is very similar to what Modron and his comrades tried to achieve through Gallifreyan technology with horrific results earlier in Season 20. So Five Doctors itself borrows a lot from earlier Peter Davison stories, including the return of the top 2 Cybermen from Season 19's Earthshock. In fact, there are 3 sets of Cyber leaders and Cyber lieutenants in this story. I think Terrance misses a trick on page 122, when everyone realizes that the 3 carved faces on Rassilon's sarcophagus are actually Time Lords who won the gift of immortality, one, open quote, close quote. Terrance had not introduced those faces earlier as a clue, which is something Terrance usually doesn't miss. But the tagline, quote, Borusa had achieved his immortality, an eternity of living death, is pretty solid. I also like the overt reference to the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland on page 123, as the Master disappears, his snarl, quote, hanging in the air, even after the rest of him has departed. Putting the literature back in Doctor Who literature, as they say. But page 124 is missing Jon Pertwee's closing retort to Patrick Troughton as they take their respective departures.
Goodbye. Fancy pants. Scarecrow.
Also missing from the book, as I alluded to earlier, is the Third Doctor admitting to Sarah Jane that he hasn't even met her yet in his timeline. Terrance also, unusually, on page 128, ends the book with a line of dialogue, and not with some valedictory prose comment or a final insult a la the android invasion was over. The choice here really is perfect, because the last line of dialogue to the Five Doctors on TV is about as good as Doctor Who ever gets.
It'll soon be goodbye then.
Will it?
Well, you're off to Gallifrey to be president. I suppose your Time Lord subjects will find a TARDIS that really works and get us both home.
Who said anything about Gallifrey?
You told Chancellor Flavia.
I told her she had full powers until I returned.
You're not going back?
You know, sometimes, Tegan, you take my breath away.
Won't the Time Lords be very angry?
Furious.
You mean you're deliberately choosing to go on the run from your own people in a rackety old TARDIS?
Why not? After all, that's how it all started.
Next week on Doctor Who Literature, I am very pleased to present a best-selling author, another best-selling author, who got his start in Doctor Who fandom, but has since branched out and has written novels for many other properties, including Stranger Things, Star Wars, Elementary, the American TV series, as well as properties of his own. We'll have a long conversation about his books and about Doctor Who fandom. We're going to have Adam Christopher on the show next week, and we'll also be talking, of course, about the Five Doctors as well. I will also be playing next week all of the various audio clips that you have sent me, reminiscences of the Five Doctors, book and television. I intended to play those this week, but we are kind of running out of time. That'll be next week on Doctor Who Literature. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. This podcast is produced by David Barsky, Jim Sangster, and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guests, Elizabeth Morton, Graeme Burk, Stacey Smith, and David Barsky. Special thanks again to Chloe Davies from Pan Macmillan Books. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels. That's Dr. Who Novels. Although the day that I record this is the day after Elon Musk stopped paying his $1 billion renewal fee for the Google Cloud service. So Twitter has been down for most of today. Again, does not speak well for the long-term prognosis for that particular platform as long as Elon Musk is the owner. So if all else fails, please email me at drwholiterature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
A Doctor Who Podcast Network.